The sun was just rising over the city, spilling orange light over the streets, when a man stepped out of his modest apartment. He was tall, strong, and moved with quiet confidence. He had a calm face that rarely showed emotion, and his eyes seemed to notice everything around him. On the surface, he looked like an ordinary man living an ordinary life, going about his daily routine. But beneath that calm exterior lay a story few could ever imagine. He had spent years serving in the most demanding military operations, leading elite teams in missions that most people could only read about in history books or watch in movies. But now he lived quietly, trying to leave his past behind. That morning he planned to visit the city center. He had some errands to run and wanted to enjoy the peaceful start of the day. As he walked along the streets, he noticed the usual morning crowd. People hurrying to work, street vendors setting up their stalls, children laughing on their way to school. He greeted a neighbor with a nod and a soft smile. Life seemed simple, ordinary, and for the first time in years he felt free. However, life has a way of changing in an instant, and he was about to learn that some people make decisions without knowing the whole story. As he reached the corner near the main square, he saw a small commotion. Two police officers were talking to a young man, their voices raised and their gestures sharp. The man paused, keeping a safe distance, hoping to avoid trouble. He had no reason to interfere, but something about the scene drew his attention. Without warning, one of the officers turned toward him. Maybe it was the way he walked, his height, or the calmness in his eyes, but suddenly, he became the target. "You there, stop," the officer shouted. The man froze for a moment. He raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not doing anything," he said, his voice calm but firm. But the officer's expression hardened. They approached him aggressively, their tone no longer asking but demanding. People on the street started to watch. Some whispered. Others recorded the scene with their phones. The man tried to explain himself, saying he was just walking and had nothing to do with the earlier incident. He moved slowly, keeping his body relaxed, showing no threat. But the officers misread his calmness as arrogance. One of them reached for his arm roughly. That was a mistake. He didn't panic, but his body responded naturally, instinctively. He stepped back, maintaining balance, careful not to hurt anyone. It was clear to him that any sudden movement could make the situation worse. One officer's grip tightened. "You're coming with us," he barked. The man nodded, still calm. He knew arguing would not help. Yet as they tried to guide him toward the patrol car, their aggression increased. A scuffle broke out. Onlookers gasped. Some shouted for the officers to stop. The man used his years of training to stay in control. He didn't fight recklessly, didn't try to overpower them in anger. Instead, he positioned himself so that he could protect himself without causing harm. But the officers were not expecting this. They had assumed he was an ordinary civilian, easy to control. They didn't realize that he had faced life and death situations in his career, situations far more dangerous than a street misunderstanding. The struggle was brief, but intense. The man's calm demeanor and precise movements kept him from being injured. Yet the officers felt uneasy, their authority challenged. They finally managed to escort him to the patrol car. But there was a tension in their actions now. They exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to expect from him. He sat quietly in the back of the car, hands on his lap, his eyes observing everything. His mind was alert, analyzing the situation, planning his next moves if things escalated. Despite the calm on the outside, he felt a small surge of frustration. He had done nothing wrong, and yet he was being treated like a criminal. During the ride to the local detention center, the man remained silent. The officers tried to make conversation, asking questions in a tone that was more intimidating than friendly. He answered briefly, politely, never raising his voice. It annoyed them, but he knew that any reaction, anger, fear, or resistance could be used against him. He had learned long ago that in situations like this, control over one's emotions was more powerful than physical strength. He observed the city passing by, noting the patterns, the people, and the sounds. Every detail mattered. This awareness had saved his life countless times during missions, and he relied on it now, even in a situation that seemed mundane compared to the battles he had faced. When they arrived at the detention center, the atmosphere changed completely. The building was cold, with harsh lights and echoing hallways. Guards moved with authority, and inmates watched from cells and corners. The man was led through narrow corridors, each step carefully measured. His presence drew attention. Some guards whispered to each other, while a few inmates looked at him with curiosity, sensing something different about him. Despite his calm, he could feel the tension growing. Every guard he passed was alert, unsure of who they were dealing with. In the processing area, the officers continued their aggressive questioning. They accused him of resisting arrest, causing a scene, and being uncooperative. He listened quietly, giving short, factual answers. He knew that any unnecessary words could be twisted. Yet he also noticed the way the guards interacted with each other, the way they underestimated him. They assumed his silence was fear, confusion, or arrogance. They did not know they were in the presence of a man who had spent years training for combat, strategy, and survival in extreme situations. The situation escalated when one guard reached for his arm again, a gesture meant to intimidate. The man reacted instinctively, positioning himself to prevent unnecessary force while maintaining control over his movements. The guard was startled. For a moment, the power dynamic shifted, but the man remained calm. He was not looking for conflict. He simply would not allow himself to be harmed unfairly. Other guards quickly moved in, surrounding him. He assessed their numbers, their body language, and possible escape routes all in a few seconds. The precision and speed of his mind were unseen by the others, invisible yet potent. Despite the tension, the man kept his composure. He spoke softly when necessary, using words to calm rather than provoke. "I am not here to fight," he said, his voice steady. "I will comply with the rules. Please do not escalate this." The officers hesitated, confused by the calm and authority in his tone. It was not fear or arrogance, it was experience, discipline, and self-control. Yet they were still aggressive, unsure of how to proceed. This moment revealed a dangerous misunderstanding. They assumed they had the upper hand, but they did not understand the depth of his training or his ability to remain composed under pressure. While all this was happening, other inmates and staff began to take notice. Whispers spread, curiosity sparked, and some guards started questioning their own assumptions. The man's presence, his calm but strong aura, created tension that went beyond physical confrontation. It was a silent reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that assumptions could lead to mistakes. Hours passed as the processing continued. Despite being in a hostile environment, the man remained patient, aware that any rash action could make things worse. He noticed small details: the guard who seemed nervous, the officer who was overconfident, the gaps in security that could be exploited if needed. But he did not act recklessly. He knew that the situation, though stressful, was not life-threatening at the moment. Patience, observation, and controlled response were his allies. By the end of the day, the man had been moved to a holding cell. He sat quietly, reflecting on the events. Though treated unfairly, he remained calm, aware that losing composure would only worsen his situation. He thought about the mistakes made by the officers, the misunderstandings and the assumptions that had nearly led to serious conflict. Deep down, he knew this experience would leave a lasting impression on those involved. Whether they realized it now or later, outside the cell, the city continued its rhythm. Unaware of the story unfolding within its walls, people went about their lives, oblivious to the man who had faced forces far greater than this, yet now found himself in a simple human conflict. It was a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary people live ordinary lives, and that a single moment can reveal more about human nature than years of routine observation. The man leaned back, closed his eyes for a brief moment, and allowed himself to breathe. He had survived this first encounter not by brute force but by patience, intelligence, and restraint. He knew that the days ahead would test him further, but he was ready. In his quiet, calm way, he prepared for whatever was coming next, knowing that true strength often reveals itself not through aggression, but through control, discipline, and understanding. The night had fallen over the detention center, casting long shadows across the walls and corridors. Inside, the man sat quietly in his cell, his thoughts moving faster than anyone could imagine. He had been through countless dangerous situations in his life, but this was different. There were no enemies with guns, no explosions, no missions to accomplish. Just a small, confined space and guards who had underestimated him completely. The calm he carried on the surface hid a mind that was alert and calculating. Every sound, every movement outside the bars was observed and analyzed. The other inmates noticed him too. They whispered among themselves, some glancing with curiosity, others with suspicion. Most had never seen someone carry themselves with such quiet authority. Even in a place where chaos was normal, he seemed untouched by it, as if he belonged somewhere entirely different. Some tried to approach him, asking questions, seeking attention, but he answered only what was necessary. There was no boasting, no anger, no attempt to show off. His restraint drew more attention than his strength ever could. Meanwhile, outside the cell, the guards were uneasy. The day's events had shaken their confidence, though none of them admitted it. They had expected an easy situation, a routine arrest, and instead found themselves struggling to control a man who had done nothing wrong, and yet commanded respect and caution merely by existing. Whispers passed among the staff, questioning how someone so calm could also be so composed under pressure. The tension in the hallways was thick, invisible but palpable. The man's mind wandered briefly to his past. He remembered training exercises in harsh conditions, missions in foreign lands where every decision could mean life or death. Those experiences had taught him discipline, patience, and the ability to assess every variable in a stressful situation. It was the same skill set he was using now, though the danger was different. Here the enemy was not a soldier, but ignorance, assumption, and aggression. The lesson was clear. Even in a seemingly minor situation, the wrong move could escalate into chaos. A few hours later, one of the senior guards approached the cell, carrying files and speaking quietly to a colleague. The man watched them carefully, noting their body language, the way their hands trembled slightly, the hesitation in their movements. He knew that their confidence had been shaken, but he remained patient. Any display of aggression on his part could be used to justify their earlier mistakes, and he would not allow that. Instead, he focused on remaining calm, maintaining control over himself even as he observed them struggling with control over the situation. Then came the first direct confrontation of the evening. A guard, younger and more impatient than the others, tried to provoke him. The officer leaned close to the bars, his voice loud and sharp, trying to intimidate. "You think you're better than us?" he shouted. The man looked at him steadily, unflinching. He did not raise his voice. He did not snap back. "I am not here to fight," he said simply, his tone calm but firm. "I will follow the rules. There is no reason to escalate this." The words were simple, yet they carried authority. The guard's face flushed, frustration building. He expected resistance, fear, or panic, anything he could use to assert dominance. Instead, he faced patience and intelligence, which were harder to fight than fists or weapons. The young officer stepped back, shaking his head slightly, clearly unsettled. The man noticed the change, filing it away in his mind. It was not victory. It was understanding. Every reaction he observed was another piece of the puzzle, another tool for managing the situation without unnecessary force. As the night wore on, the man's presence began to affect the entire facility. The guards moved more cautiously, double-checking procedures, whispering to each other about what had happened earlier in the day. Some inmates began sharing stories of the calm man in the cell, adding exaggerations that only made him more mysterious in their eyes. He remained quiet, aware of the stories, but unconcerned. His focus was on observation, on understanding the people around him, and on preparing for what might come next. Midnight arrived, and with it, a shift change among the guards. The new team was unaware of the man's history, just like the first officers had been. They moved confidently, assuming control would be easy, but their confidence was misplaced. Even without raising his voice or moving aggressively, the man's presence demanded respect. Subtle movements, the way he held himself, the calm in his eyes, it all communicated a message they did not fully understand. He could have taken control if needed, but he chose restraint. The new guard in charge attempted a routine security check, approaching the cell with the usual authoritative tone. "Time for inspection," he said. The man nodded slightly, cooperating fully. As the guard reached toward him, the man positioned himself carefully, not to resist but to maintain balance and awareness. The officer's hands paused mid-motion, sensing something off but unable to identify it. It was a silent standoff, tension building without a single word spoken. The man's training allowed him to assess and respond instinctively, while the guard relied only on brute force and assumption. For hours, this quiet tension continued. The man observed the movements, the conversations, the small errors made by the guards. Every action, every hesitation, every glance was stored in his memory. He was not plotting revenge or retaliation. He was simply aware. Awareness was survival, whether in combat zones or within the walls of a prison. Even when surrounded by individuals who misunderstood him completely, he remained in control of himself, which was more important than controlling anyone else. By the early morning, a senior official arrived at the facility. He had been briefed about the unusual situation, the man who had caused confusion and tension among the guards. The man's calm presence and disciplined demeanor had reached their ears through reports and whispers. The official approached cautiously, unsure what to expect. The man remained seated, watching, analyzing, yet outwardly relaxed. There was no need to act. Simply being himself was enough to command attention. When questioned, he explained the day's events in a calm, logical manner. He answered clearly, without anger or defensiveness. His tone was firm but respectful. The official noticed the difference between this man and the officers who had struggled to control him. He recognized experience, discipline, and intelligence. Something about the man's presence suggested he had lived through situations far beyond normal civilian life. The official left with a mix of curiosity and respect, realizing this situation was far more complex than it had appeared at first glance. Later that morning, the guards who had previously interacted with him reflected on their actions. They realized that assumptions, fear, and underestimation had led to unnecessary aggression. They had judged him by appearances, expecting compliance or submission, and had instead faced calm resistance and intelligence. This quiet reflection, although unspoken, was a lesson in humility. For the man, this was exactly the type of reaction he had anticipated, not because he wanted conflict, but because human nature was predictable, just like it had been in countless operations he had led during his military career. The rest of the day passed slowly. The man remained patient, interacting only when necessary, observing every detail and preparing for eventual resolution. His patience was unshakable, his focus unwavering. Though the day had been long, and the situation stressful, he handled it with grace, proving that true strength is not measured by aggression, but by control, awareness, and resilience. As night approached again, the man sat quietly in his cell reflecting. He knew the days ahead could bring new challenges, but he felt confident, not because he had to fight, but because he understood the power of discipline, observation, and calm decision-making. Even when surrounded by misunderstanding and aggression, he had maintained control over himself. That control, more than any physical skill, was his greatest strength. And so the night passed quietly, but with tension still lingering in the air. The guards had learned, even if only subconsciously, that appearances could be deceiving. Inmates had stories to tell about the calm man who seemed untouchable, and the man himself remained composed, ready for whatever might come next, knowing that patience and intelligence often win battles before they even begin. The next morning, the detention center buzzed with routine activity, but the tension from the previous days lingered like a shadow. Guards moved through the hallways more cautiously. Whispers and sidelong glances exchanged as they remembered the calm man in the cell who had unsettled them all. The other inmates, too, were restless, watching the man carefully, intrigued by his quiet authority. Even in a place designed to control and intimidate, he seemed untouchable, not through brute force, but through presence, discipline, and intelligence. The man sat quietly, observing the patterns of the guards, the subtle behaviors that revealed their confidence or hesitation. Every step they took, every word spoken, was a piece of information. He had learned long ago that awareness was more powerful than strength alone. In life or death situations, a single unnoticed detail could make all the difference. Even in this situation, he treated observation as a strategy. He did not react to provocation unnecessarily. Instead, he stayed calm, letting others reveal their intentions through their actions. It didn't take long for another attempt to provoke him. A guard approached his cell, clipboard in hand, demanding answers about minor details in the intake forms. The man complied, answering politely and succinctly, but the officer's tone remained sharp. "Do you think you're smarter than us?" The guard snapped, leaning slightly over the bars. The man looked at him steady and calm, his eyes holding a quiet authority. "I'm not here to argue," he said softly. "I will follow the rules, but I expect fairness." The words had an effect. The officer blinked, caught off guard by the calm firmness in his voice. He had expected fear, defiance, or arrogance. something he could react to with aggression. Instead, he faced patience and intelligence, qualities that were difficult to counter with anger. Slowly, he stepped back, unsure of how to respond. The man's eyes never left his face, not to intimidate but to maintain awareness. A silent reminder that control was not solely in the hands of the guards. Word spread among the detention center staff about the man's behavior. Some officers were wary, sharing stories of how he had remained calm during confrontations that could have escalated into violence. Others were skeptical, unable to believe that someone so composed could exist in such a tense environment. Yet the man did not concern himself with gossip or opinions. He focused on what mattered, remaining in control of his mind and body while navigating a situation fraught with misunderstanding and aggression. As the day progressed, the man noticed subtle mistakes from the guards. Doors left slightly ajar, inattentive glances, hesitations in movement. All small things that could have been exploited, but he refrained. Discipline dictated his actions. He understood the importance of restraint, of avoiding unnecessary conflict. This was not about proving strength. It was about surviving without creating chaos, about maintaining integrity even when others had none. A few inmates began to approach quietly at first. They asked questions, shared stories, and sought guidance. The man answered calmly, offering advice in measured words. He did not command attention through force, but through the natural respect he inspired. Those who spoke with him felt a strange sense of trust, as though his presence alone reassured them. They noticed the careful way he assessed situations, the way he listened more than he spoke, and the quiet confidence that emanated from him. Meanwhile, the guards struggled to adapt. The senior officer, called to observe the situation, watched with a mix of curiosity and concern. He had seen people in trouble before, but none had moved through the detention center with such discipline and composure. The officer realized that the man's restraint was deliberate, not fear. He was assessing, controlling, and calculating every interaction. The officer's respect grew even as he remained cautious. This was not an ordinary detainee. This was someone who had experienced far more than the confines of a cell could contain. Tension escalated later that afternoon. A younger guard, frustrated by the ongoing calm and lack of resistance, tried to force the man into a physical position to search him. The man complied, but subtly shifted his weight, positioning himself so that he could remain balanced and protect himself if necessary. The guard's movements became uncertain, his confidence shaken by the ease with which the man maintained control. It was not aggression that disarmed him, but precision, patience, and the quiet authority of someone who understood risk and timing better than anyone around him. Observing this, the senior officer intervened. "Step back," he said firmly. The younger guard hesitated, then reluctantly moved away. The man nodded slightly, acknowledging the order without a word of complaint. This moment marked a subtle turning point. The guards began to understand that the situation required strategy rather than force, patience rather than anger. They were learning slowly the lessons the man had always known, that composure and intelligence often outweigh brute strength, and that assumptions can lead to mistakes with serious consequences. Throughout the evening, the man continued to observe. He noted the fatigue in the officers' movements, the hesitations in their actions, and the subtle signals of miscommunication. He understood that authority without awareness was fragile, and he remained patient, knowing that time revealed truth. The detention center, meant to control and intimidate, had become a place where his calm presence altered the dynamics, teaching lessons silently without confrontation. By nightfall, the man's reputation within the facility had grown. Inmates whispered about the quiet man who did not raise his voice, who did not fight unnecessarily yet commanded attention and respect. Guards, too, acknowledged privately that this detainee was different, someone they could not predict or underestimate. The man remained undisturbed by these observations, focused instead on the simple truths of patience, awareness, and control. He knew that these qualities had kept him alive in the most dangerous circumstances of his life, and they would guide him now. As the facility quieted for the night, the man reflected on the events of the day. He had navigated confrontations, maintained discipline, and observed those around him without resorting to aggression. His restraint had diffused tension, maintained his dignity, and subtly educated those who had misunderstood him. In a place designed to strip people of control, he had maintained his own, proving that true strength lies not in force but in awareness and composure. Even as he prepared for rest, the man remained vigilant. Every sound, every movement was noted. He knew that new challenges could arise at any time, and he remained ready. His past, filled with missions requiring strategy, patience, and courage, had prepared him for this moment. Though the dangers were different, the principles were the same. Observation, restraint, and disciplined action were tools that could handle any situation, even one as ordinary and confining as a detention center cell. That night the man slept lightly, aware of the patterns of the guards' rounds and the quiet movements in the facility. Even in sleep his mind remained alert, processing and analyzing, preparing for the next day. In a world that underestimated him, he remained a calm, focused presence, a silent teacher of patience, restraint, and quiet authority. And though the night was long, he faced it with the same composure that had guided him through the most difficult moments of his life, knowing that true power often reveals itself in silence rather than sound. Part 3 completed, 1,400 words. Simple English, human-centered, engaging, natural tone. I can now continue with Part 4 in the same style and length. Due 1. The next day, the detention center felt different. The air was heavy with unspoken tension, the kind that comes after people realize they've misjudged someone. Guards moved carefully, speaking softly to one another, while inmates watched from corners and cells, curious about the man who had unsettled the staff without a single raised voice. Even though it was just another day on the surface, under the walls, the dynamics had shifted. The man's calm authority had changed how everyone behaved. He had settled into a quiet routine. He sat on the edge of his bunk, observing the movements of guards and inmates alike, noting the small patterns that revealed intent and character. He spoke only when necessary, always measured, never defensive. His eyes missed nothing. A foot tapping nervously, a glance exchanged between guards, a whispered conversation between inmates. Each detail was recorded in his mind, providing insight into the environment and the people who occupied it. By mid-morning, a senior officer came to visit personally. Word had reached him about the previous incidents. The quiet man who had maintained complete control, while the staff struggled to manage him. The officer approached cautiously, unsure what to expect. He had encountered many difficult individuals in his career, but something about this man suggested he was different. When they spoke, the man answered clearly, calmly, and without unnecessary words. He did not challenge authority, but he did not allow assumptions to dictate how he was treated. The conversation revealed more than words. The officer could see discipline and intelligence in every gesture, every glance. There was no anger, no fear, no attempt to dominate. Instead, there was awareness, an understanding of how people think and act under pressure. The officer realized that the man's presence alone had altered the behavior of everyone around him. It was a lesson in subtle influence, something the guards had not anticipated. Later, tensions arose again when a young, impatient guard tried to assert dominance. He approached the cell aggressively, attempting to provoke a reaction. The man responded with calm observation. He moved only when necessary, positioning himself in a way that prevented harm without aggression. The guard faltered, surprised by the quiet strength and awareness he faced. Every step, every gesture of the man was calculated, not to intimidate but to maintain safety and control. This approach disarmed the guard without a word of confrontation. Word of this spread quickly among the staff. They began to understand that this man was not like any detainee they had handled before. His restraint, his composure, and his awareness were extraordinary. Some began to question their own actions and attitudes, reflecting on how assumptions and aggression had caused unnecessary conflict. Even those who had doubted him now treated him with caution and respect. The man, however, remained focused on what truly mattered, navigating the situation with integrity and patience. By the afternoon, a few inmates approached him with questions and concerns. They were curious, some seeking advice, others simply drawn to his calm presence. He listened attentively, responding with measured words and practical guidance. He did not dominate or lecture. Instead, he offered insight that encouraged them to think carefully before acting. His influence grew quietly, a presence that taught without force, commanding respect simply by being composed and observant. As evening approached, the tension between the man and the staff reached its peak. The guards who had been involved in earlier confrontations were cautious, unsure how to proceed. The man noticed this, but he did not exploit it. Instead, he remained patient, understanding that time and calm observation were often more powerful than immediate action. Every interaction, every movement was an opportunity to maintain control without escalation. Then came a turning point. A senior officer, reviewing reports from the past days, discovered the man's background. It was clear now why he had handled the confrontations with such calm authority. He had been part of elite military operations, trained in strategy, discipline, and survival. The revelation shocked the staff. The very person they had underestimated, the quiet man who had caused so much tension, was a Delta Force commander, experienced in situations far more dangerous than any detention center could present. The revelation changed everything. Guards who had approached him with aggression now treated him with caution and respect. Inmates whispered among themselves, sharing stories that added to his quiet legend. The man, however, remained unchanged. He did not boast or demand recognition. His discipline and composure were constant, unaffected by the discovery of his past. He understood that respect earned through action and calm was far more valuable than respect demanded by title or reputation. That night, as the facility settled into quiet routines, the man reflected on the past few days. He had navigated hostility, misunderstanding, and aggression without losing control. He had maintained discipline, observed patterns, and influenced behavior, all while remaining true to his principles. In a place designed to break individuals down, he had preserved his integrity, teaching lessons subtly through patience and composure. Even as the night grew darker and the sounds of the facility echoed in the corridors, the man remained vigilant. He knew that new challenges could arise at any moment. His training and experience had taught him that awareness and restraint were always essential. Every guard, every inmate, every moment of tension was an opportunity to remain disciplined and in control. In this quiet way, he continued to navigate the complex world around him, demonstrating that true strength lies in intelligence, patience, and calm authority rather than force alone. The night passed without incident, but the impact of his presence lingered. Guards moved with greater caution and awareness, understanding the consequences of assumptions. Inmates carried whispers and stories, learning from his quiet example. And the man, ever composed, prepared for the days ahead, confident that his discipline and calm would guide him through whatever challenges remained.